Hello everyone and welcome back to Dusty Tunes. I hope that you guys have been having an amazing day and I hope you're ready to get into this video. So let's go. So I have noticed that one of my TikTok videos has been getting a lot of attention recently, which is kind of crazy to me considering the fact that I made this video almost 5 years ago. Yeah, I've been going strong on TikTok for a long time. But the video that I'm talking about is referring to the episode of Invader Zim titled Dark Harvest. Now, when you look at this episode, chances are you're going to see things like it being the most controversial Invader Zim episode, how inappropriate it is for children, or how much the networks tried to censor it. Today though, I want to tell you guys what this episode entails and how I personally feel about this episode and Invader Zim as a whole. So I used to run a series on my TikTok page called Why Did It Get Cancelled, where I would showcase the reasoning behind a lot of our favorite animated series cancellations, and if I remember correctly, I believe that Invader Zim, Flapjack, and Chowder were all included in the same episode, seeing as they were all canceled for very similar reasons. So when it came to animated series that were released in the early 2000s throughout the 2010s, they were all pretty much targeted to the same demographic, and that was young to preteen boys. And since this demographic is pretty specific, it most definitely could have been the determining factor in whether or not a series was canceled or got signed on for another season. This demographic was also the reason why so many animated series back then had a male-dominated cast, followed very specific stereotypes, and were all pretty surface level. Now, this isn't me saying that every animated series was this way, but when we compare most animated series that are targeted towards a younger male demographic versus those that are targeted towards a younger female demographic, we do tend to see them dig a little deeper to help relate issues to the targeted demographic and what they would be facing on a day-to-day level, like Brace Face as told by Ginger in the Wild Thornberrys, for example. This is also the reason why series like the Powerpuff Girls were seen to be controversial at the time, and no one truly believed how successful it would be, seeing as no one thought that a series with 3 female protagonists could be enjoyable to little boys. All this being said, it's really confusing to me how these series didn't end up matching up with the targeted demographic, when in my personal opinion, I couldn't see how younger or preteen boys wouldn't have enjoyed a series like Flapjack or Chowder. I feel like they were curated to specifically be enjoyable to these age groups, but I guess I'm wrong? Okay, but moving on. Invader Zim, much like other series that came out in the early 2000s, was very unhinged and unfortunately would be punished for certain choices they made throughout the show's short duration. The series itself received a lot of backlash as parents found it to be extremely inappropriate. The creators of Invader Zim created a series where not only the atmosphere, but even the characters themselves were very, very dark. Now, given the fact that the series was meant to be targeted towards younger boys, it definitely was understandable to see why the network wasn't the biggest fan of its grim antics. Although the series was a miss with its targeted demographic, the series quickly became somewhat of a cult classic with older audiences that thoroughly enjoyed the series. And characters like Gurr even became well-known marks throughout the early 2000s. Like, if you were around during this time, you definitely saw Gurr both in his robot and disguise form, literally everywhere. Actually, I think it's pretty safe to say that most series that came out in the 90s and early 2000s were received pretty well with a teenage demographic, as most of the shows were never really intended for a younger audience in the first place. And because of that, many shows from the early 2000s were constantly facing scrutiny from disappointed parents, all pretty much having that one controversial episode that was either heavily censored or banned altogether, and essentially pushed the series closer and closer to their cancellation date, or worse, ended up being connected to a real-life murder. And for Invader Zim, this episode was Dark Harvest. Now, before going any further into this video, I do want to say that if talking about or seeing human organs upsets you in any way, please click off of this video now, because this episode literally revolves heavily around organ harvesting, so you have been warned. So in this episode, we will see Dib playing around with this device called the X-Scope, which is basically a portable x-ray machine that is worn like goggles. It is then revealed when Dib scans Zim with the X-Scope that he doesn't have human organs, but rather his organs are unknown. This piece of information is important because it's what this entire episode is revolved around. When Zim is diagnosed with a case of head pigeons by his teacher, he is sent to the nurse. Now, of course, Dib wasn't going to let Zim leave without instilling him with some sort of paranoia about the nurse finding out that he doesn't have human organs and turning him into the doctors who would end up experimenting on him. Now, Zim being Zim, he decides to take matters into his own hands by using one of his devices to literally steal the organs from other students in an organ harvesting scheme. Now, the goal of this madness is to take the students' organs and shove them into his body to make himself appear more human-like. If the idea of organ harvesting wasn't bad enough, Zim is literally replacing the children's organs with inanimate objects. So if lacking their vital organs wasn't enough to lead to their demise, I'm sure having a foreign object lodged into their systems would definitely do the trick. The imagery around this episode was extremely dark and very icky in a way. It kind of gave me the same vibe as the room from the first Saw movie. You know, the one with the bathtub? Yeah, those kind of vibes. Now, Dib's drawing of Zim laying on the operating table with organs just fully exposed and falling onto the floor was completely gross and unnecessary in a children's network show. And don't even get me started on the flat out chilling screams you can hear while Dib is talking to the nurse. Again, all of this is happening in a middle school, and I'm not talking about little silly screams. I'm talking about like gut-wrenching yells and screams coming from the offices in this school. Everything about rewatching this episode again just reminded me of how disturbing it actually is. Seeing all of the children walking around sick and in pain was pretty sad to see, but when the camera pans over to a Zim who is literally stuffed and overflowing with human organs, the feeling goes from sadness to disgust very, very quickly, especially when we see him slurp up a child's intestine like a spaghetti noodle. Now, I know that I probably shouldn't be thinking too far into this, but I couldn't help but wonder how many children died from a situation like this, considering the fact that alongside all of the other organs that are missing from their bodies, Zim also stole the hearts. The hearts of 6 children. Like, that means automatic death. There are at least 6 children that are dead from this situation. This episode also includes a pretty suspenseful chase scene between Zim and Dib as he also tries to take his organs. But the disturbing energy around this episode doesn't end when the credits roll, because not only was this episode highly controversial for being extremely grotesque, but there would also be a crime that is allegedly linked to this episode. Now, I won't go too much into the detail about the case itself. Let's just say that there was a teenager that was allegedly inspired by the acts of Dark Harvest and wanted to conduct his own experiment about the human body pertaining to their organs or a lack of them. They say that the defendant brought up the episode in a comedic way, although people close to him say that he was very interested with this series and other media involving horror. So, hey, take with that information what you want. If the content within this episode wasn't enough to label it controversial, then this definitely was, not to mention the speculation that this was the reason of the show's cancellation. Now, personally, I really liked the episode, if that's a weird thing to say. But then again, Ren and Stimpy was my favorite show growing up, so that probably explains a lot. Now, I do want to say, in no shape or form do I think that episodes like these should ever be promoted or presented to children, but I also don't see anything wrong with very mild comedic cartoon violence and things of that nature. Cartoons are great because we get to see things like a mouse slamming a hammer on the head of a cat, but when it goes from this to literal organ harvesting, that's where the line starts to get a little fuzzy, because kids don't need to be seeing things like that. As an adult, I enjoy things like this because I am an adult. You know, kids, they don't need to see organ harvesting. Let's keep that away from the kids. I've said it once and I'll say it 1,000 times again. Shows like Invader Zim would have done wonders if they were actually targeted towards an older audience or had the opportunity to be. And it sucks that we were robbed of what could have been, because honestly, having a dark animated series that was equally as funny as it was dark would be so cool than a lot of the slop that we have that's targeted towards adults nowadays, but maybe that's just me. But what did you think about Dark Harvest? Do you think that all of the criticisms about this episode were justifiable? Do you think that parents were just being way too critical? Or should they have kept something like this far, far away from children? Let me know down in the comments below. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, let me know that you did by liking the video, subscribing to the channel, and turning on notifications so you never miss a video in the future. Thank you guys so much. I hope that you continue to have an amazing day, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!